Representative Ocasio-Cortez, what do you say to that point, right? When we've got a significant amount of evidence that China owns the vast majority, if not all, 80% plus of the cobalt mine production coming out of Congo, et cetera. And we know, I think it's irrefuted, that there's child labor exploited to get those minerals. Those minerals are central, if not fully necessary, for the production of EVs, which even objectively we have to acknowledge are not fully able to power the ability of the American public to get to their jobs and their work and so forth. And yet we're mandating that we have 2/3 of the production be EVs by 2030. Assume we were able to ever produce batteries that last long enough, the charging stations, all the stuff. Why would we get rid of the American production of it?
Thank you. There are several different components to your question. I want to make sure that I address them. First and foremost, on the issue of child exploitation, child labor, I think it is the role of the United States for us to push back forcefully on this production, and not just in the production of energy, but across the board. We see this in textile production, energy production, cobalt mining. It is horrific, and we need to make sure that our sources do not include child labor. But to get to the core of the question, too, on the China front, is that I find it interesting that there is this concern about Chinese ownership of minerals, and it is legitimate. However, the response to that seems to be deregulation specifically for companies that are largely Chinese-owned here in the United States. These companies are subsidiaries where the benefit of what we are deregulating here, and I'll give you a specific example. I would be remiss not to mention that the minerals produced specifically at the proposed Twin Metals mine that is implicated in this legislation would most likely be shipped to China for refining and smelting to be sold on the global market. These are not American-owned companies that American mined minerals would be going to. And so if your concern is the Chinese predominance of ownership in the mining market, I would be very concerned about passing this legislation. So that, I think, on the China piece there. And lastly, on the meeting our targets and mining cobalt, I think it's a false choice to say that in order for us to mine cobalt, we either have to destroy some of the most sacred lands in the United States or rely on child labor. There's responsible mining in the United States that is available to us. But secondly, I also find it interesting that the majority presently pushes back against battery recycling, which would allow us to open the path to reducing our reliance on mining in general. There is enormous potential in recycling many of these EV batteries, but we have not made the investments or the shifts necessary in order to unlock that so that we can reduce our reliance on solely mining as the only source of battery.
For far too long, the Biden administration has used people when unelected federal officials to enact their radical agenda. Our constituents in American industry have paid the price. House Republicans are committed to ending the weaponization of the bureaucratic state, and that's why we're taking up several bills to roll back executive branch overreach. H.R. 764, the Trust the Science Act, delists the gray wolf as an endangered species, marking a successful story of conservation and stewardship. H.R. 6285, Alaska's Right to Produce Act, H.R. 3195, the Superior National Forest Restoration Act, and H.R. 2925, the Mining Regulatory Clarity Act, will remove roadblocks set up by radical officials to hinder American energy production. Finally, H.R. 615, the Protecting Access for Hunters and Anglers Act, will prevent the Biden administration from barring the use of certain ammunition or tackle on public lands.
Earth Day was just last week, but the celebration is clearly over with Fossil Fuel Week that seems to be presented with many of these bills. It's astounding how House Republicans continue to push an agenda that people are simply not asking for. They voted to cut veterans' benefits, raise costs, and, like we're seeing today, enrich the wealthiest corporations, especially the fossil fuel industry. To the ranking member's point, one good thing that we can say about these bills is that they have no chance of becoming law. They are going nowhere in the Senate. And nevertheless, though, we have 6 bills before us, so let's get into them. H.R. 6285 would fast-track drilling for oil and gas in the pristine Arctic National Wildlife Refuge and the Bering Sea. We're going to hear about how we need to destroy these places to help with energy prices, but that is simply not true. The United States is already the #1 producer of oil and the #1 producer and exporter of gas. All that has done is increase carbon emissions and enrich an industry that is already seeing record profits. Meanwhile, consumers still face volatile prices. That's for 2 reasons. The first is price gouging by the oil and gas industry, and the second is that oil and gas are global commodities. No amount of endless drilling can shield us from price shocks when OPEC decides to raise prices or when Russia decides to start a war in Europe. If we want energy independence, we should be transitioning to solar, wind, geothermal, and other clean energy sources that aren't subject to those kinds of shocks, and that create good union jobs right here at home. Oil and gas already enjoy an obscene wealth of tax giveaways in this country, special loopholes, and other subsidies as well. But we're supposed to believe that if we continue to let them drill just a little more, that they will finally lower their prices. This is all trickle-down nonsense. This bill is a giveaway to some of the wealthiest and most damaging polluters in the United States. And then we have the mining bills. Our existing mining law is outdated and bad enough as it is. The one frail guardrail that we currently have is that currently a mining claim is only valid if it contains valuable minerals. Makes sense. There has to actually be something there to mine. H.R. 2925 gets rid of that requirement, making it so that anyone can get exclusive rights to our public lands for about $10 per acre per year, permanently locking up almost any public land without there even being a valuable mineral deposit. Then, the claimant can conduct whatever, quote, mining-related activities they want, including burying the land in toxic mining waste. Plus, the bill rolls out the welcome mat for, quote, unquote, nuisance claims by bad actors who want to lock land up from being used for conservation or renewable energy unless someone buys them out. Meanwhile, H.R. 3195 would allow toxic sulfide ore copper mining in the Superior National Forest just outside the pristine Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness in Minnesota. The Forest Service already looked into this and concluded that the mine could result in, and I quote, extreme, serious, and irreparable harm to the watershed of this wilderness area. These bills are total giveaways to wealthy corporate polluters. It's climate denialism, pure and simple. That theme continues with H.R. 3397, which would repeal the Bureau of Land Management's public lands rule. The Bureau has a multiple-use mandate that requires striking a balance between all potential uses of the 245 million surface acres of the people's lands that it manages, including commercial, recreational, and conservation activities. The new regulation finally ensures that conservation is on equal footing with uses like oil and gas development, timber, livestock, grazing, and mining. The rule also standardizes and provides guidance for related tools like conservation leases. It does not prevent responsible energy development, including renewable energy projects and building transmission lines. But this bill would repeal the rule because putting conservation on equal footing with fossil fuels is apparently too much to ask. Next is H.R. 764, the Orwellian-named Trust the Science Act. According to this bill, the science says that Congress should silence conservation experts and mandate that the iconic gray wolf be delisted under the Endangered Species Act. Somehow, I think that's not what the science really says. The last time the wolf was delisted, we saw states set up harvest quotas and even cash bounties for killing these animals, even their pups. And finally, we have H.R. 615, which would ban the Bureau of Land Management, the Forest Service, and the Fish and Wildlife Service from prohibiting or regulating lead ammunition or tackle on federal lands or waters, even though alternatives do exist that do not poison everything in sight. Right now, we have a climate crisis, student loans burdening our youth and our economy, healthcare costs to deal with, but this set of bills is what Republicans are currently doing in the waning days of their majority. They're putting forward an agenda brought to you by GOP, guns, oil, and polluters. It's not too late to put up a better schedule for the House this week. I oppose these bills and yield back.
I am very concerned that these bills are a huge step back for our environment and our endangered species. They seem to be predicated on a false kind of a binary choice. And I don't think it's true that President Biden or Democrats or the American people have any interest in having a blanket prohibition on development, but we do want a system that fairly takes into account public safety, conservation, and the damage to our environment and our children's future if we aren't taking those into consideration. So can you comment on that?
Absolutely, Representative Scanlon. As you noted, particularly in the public land rule, specifically, this shift in the rule is not even to put conservation and restoration above, energy production, recreation, or any other considerations. It's simply to allow the consideration to be on equal footing. And I would emphatically push back on the notion that conservation is just simply cordoning off, that this rule is just about conservation and cordoning off several acres of land and saying there's nothing to be done here. But this is also about land restoration. And there are so many acres of land, federal lands, public lands. This is land that belongs to the people of the United States of America, that has been dumped on, that has been allowed to be overridden with toxic waste, that people are getting sick from, that species are becoming endangered from. And to allow that to simply be in equal consideration as the federal government and the Bureau of Land Management doles out and makes decisions, oftentimes affirmatively about energy production, I think is eminently reasonable.
I think that makes a lot of sense, that we're trying to balance some competing concerns, but that we really do need to take into account these conservation concerns. So I would yield back.
This is the problem, is we keep hearing from the Republicans that they're about America first, right? We keep hearing that they're not, that they want to take on China. But then when they have a chance, they do not do it. This bill does nothing to stop China or Russia or any other foreign corporations. As much as I might like Canada, Canadian corporations are some of the biggest corporations mining our resources and not giving the American people a dime. And that's what bothers me about this. All kinds of things that bother me. But Representative Ocasio-Cortez, you wanted to respond to some of this.
Representative Fernandez, you've encapsulated so much of what is wrong with the general thrust of many of these bills. And to your point, this is not about what many in the Republican majority are putting forward is not about America first. It's about America to the highest bidder. And it's about America to whoever is willing to pay the most. And the idea that federal public lands that belong to the American people of the United States could potentially be given away to any foreign company. And then when you importantly put that together with another one of the bills that are proposed today, which is the complete deregulation of mining in the United States, where they don't even have to prove that there is a valid claim to a mineral in a space. This can very seriously be used for dangerous purposes that I think are counter to U.S. national security, including our energy security. We have to transition to renewable energy and to a built-up grid in the United States, which includes building out new energy transmission lines. And imagine a scenario where a foreign-owned company in the United States knows that we domestically are trying to build out our energy grid and build out an energy transmission line that requires going through federal land, and they decide to stake that plot in order to avoid and prevent the development of energy transmission lines in the United States. It could slow down our grid, and there's so many different ways that this could go sideways if we don't put a check to this right now. And we have to make sure that we're both engaging in conservation, engaging in restoration, but also engaging in responsible use and our responsibility to be proper stewards on behalf of the American people of our federal lands.
Yeah, I think that what we are looking at today really prioritizes the biggest, wealthiest corporations, yet again, mining corporations, whether they be American or foreign, over public interest. This is public land, American land. And Americans deserve to get paid when you take stuff out of it, because that's our minerals.
And
Those are our resources.
One last note, Representative, on the idea that the boundary waters and the deregulation around that is not of concern. There is currently mining in that area of taconite, but we're talking about expansion of this mining into elements like copper sulfide, which are far more toxic. And the fact that they are underground near waters, boundary waters, is actually quite alarming, if not more alarming than otherwise. So I yield back.